Welcome everyone to CWS Wildlife Chronicles webinar. Our topic for today is writing on wildlife conservation for the media. And I'm very excited. I have two brilliant media professionals who come from very diverse backgrounds, so this will make for a very, very interesting conversation. We have Megha Murthy, who is the editor-in-chief of Ground Glass Sustain. This is a social impact initiative that tells stories and creates awareness on India's natural world. As a founding member and editor-in-chief of Ground Glass Sustain, she has been instrumental in shaping the platform and vision, editorial voice, and content strategy. Megha also hosts the series In Conversation, where she features India's wildlife luminaries. She has been a journalist, editor, and communication strategy expert for nearly 20 years. Passionate about pushing the boundaries for storytelling for nature, she has also served as a guest lecturer at educational institutions such as Shrishti Manipal School of Design, Sophia College, Ashoka University, and many others. And my other panelist today is Rishika Pardikar. She's an independent journalist based in Bangalore. She covers issues related to wildlife, tribal rights, and climate change with a focus on science, law, and policy. Rishika has written for many reputed publications such as The Wire, The Hindu, Manga Bay, Frontline, Nature, Article 14, AGUs, US, and many others. So welcome, Megha and Rishika. I'm very excited to have you both here.
Thank you, Deepa.
So to start off, my first question is for Megha. What was the idea behind starting a platform like Ground Glass Sustain?
Well, I want to start by first thanking you for inviting us here to have this conversation, and also by setting a little bit of context. One of my favorite authors, Rebecca Solnit, has written this really wonderful piece to The Guardian, which many of you may have read, where she talks about how every crisis is in part a crisis of storytelling, and how that is true for the climate chaos as well. And we are living in a world where, forests are being mined every day, and our rivers are being dammed, our oceans are full of plastic, and our wetlands are full of garbage. And I don't even want to get started on how hot it is. I live in Delhi and it's 45 degrees and none of us are able to step out of the house. So this thing has become very real, and it's literally now at our doorstep, and it cannot get any closer than this. So it was in this context that, Sustain evolved. And we realized the importance of telling these stories. And not only just telling these stories, but telling these stories now. We are also living in what is being called an age of extinction, where species are disappearing without a trace, and entire habitats are vanishing so rapidly that we don't even know what we're really losing, right? So our goal, our objective when we started Sustain was, we thought instead of spreading human doom and telling people that you're all going to die, which is inevitable, on a side note, but we thought instead we should try and help rebuild people's really generous connection with the wild and with the nature around them. And in our heads, really, it could only be done by helping people fall in love with the natural world around them. Because why would you try to fight for something that you do not love? So then our goal at Sustain became to sort of create an encyclopedia of knowledge, focusing on India's habitats, India's species, India's communities, and thereby help to create advocates for this natural world. But over and above that, we were also very clear that we wanted to create content that was inclusive, that tried to break barriers in a sense, and appeal to all kinds of people. Which is why we make films, we write, photo essays, there are articles, there's humor, there are infographics, so that different people with different kind of proclivities have something in it for them. That is the whole idea of that Sustain was really built on. The other thing that is really important for us when we set up was also who is telling the story. The story itself is important, but who's telling the story is also really important to us, which is why a lot of our films, we try our best not to airdrop crews from Delhi and Bombay to tell really local regional stories from Arunachal. We try and use as many local filmmakers as possible and work with them to develop their stories. So that was also one of our main goals, sustain. And another thing that has something that has evolved over the years is that we've also started translating a lot of our content into regional languages so that the films and the stories that we tell about communities find a way back to those communities. So that is really the whole origin story, in a sense, and our philosophy at what we do at System.
Wow. That's a really wide range of spectrum that you cover, from articles to films and photo essays. So I'll come back to that, but I'll move to Rishika now. Rishika, you write a lot on policy and law and some really hardcore analysis pieces. So what motivated you to write about these topics?
That's it. Yeah. Before I get into what I would like to say, so I really want to appreciate what Round Glass Sustain does, because I remember one of the first pieces that I saw that actually grabbed my attention was a photo essay on kingfishers, and the title was something like Jewels. It was beautiful, and I've written for Round Glass once. I've written about lion-tailed macaques and why they're dying because of all the infrastructure. But even I don't even remember the images in my report, but I remember the kingfisher one because the imagery is just beautiful, and they always curate their photographs so well, so it really grabs attention. Okay, so yeah, now getting to my dull topic of law and policy.
Thank you, Rishika. Also, what you write about is not dull at all. It's very, very important. So please go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'm coming to law and policy. The reason I focus on these themes is because for me, governance is the issue. Governance is where things are going wrong. So, for example, we can talk about anthropogenic stress. We can talk about climate change, but these are too broad. And as a journalist, I think where my focus lies is on people in power, and that is governance, because that is where things are going wrong. And that is what I always try to hold a focus on, because if you talk about anthropogenic stress, like infrastructure, for example, it's too broad. Like who do people ask questions about? And that's where the role of journalist comes in, I think, because as a journalist, I can say this project is not necessary because it is only contractor driven. I can say that road through that national park is not for people. I cannot. And I can also say that if there is a village road which people need to go to hospitals, to go to school, then that's necessary. And actually, recently I filed an RTI. I've not written the story yet, but recently I filed an RTI for some states where some of the data shows that some clearances that were granted in the last few years were obviously for oil and gas projects or for other projects like that. But many in some years were for village roads, or they were for hospitals. These two came up a lot. Or they're for electricity lines. So if you just say anthropogenic stress and infrastructure, people will not know what to make of it. But if you say this is for a village road, which people there demand, which people there think is necessary, then maybe you can say, you can see where you want to stand on that side of the debate. Or if you see an oil and gas project in a highly eco-sensitive area, like Ding Patkai, for example, then you can know on which side of the debate you want to stand on. And I think as journalists, our focus should be on people in power, and that is governance, and that is law and policy. So that's what I try to focus on. Or if you take another anthropogenic stress like tourism, it is most definitely a stress. But I have also reported one story for Third Pole about community-based ecotourism in the Himalaya. And many are completely run by the community. So it's not ecotourism where community members are just hired as porters or as guides, but these are completely run. The homestays are run by the community. It is small scale, but this is spread across the Himalayan states, and it's also there in Nepal. I've included examples from Nepal, from India, and also from China. And these are running quite well. Like people are able to sustain themselves with only tourism. And this is also helping the wildlife there. It's a gain both, because people and I remember one person, he was telling me that now we see a benefit in conservation because we are directly getting income from it. So if you categorize infrastructure or tourism or anything else into what exactly is it, what project is it, what kind of governance do we need for it, then it will help have a lot of clarity, I think. And law also plays a big role here, because so whether it is the Wildlife Protection Act or the Forest Rights Act, I think these are very excellent tools for conservation and also for people's rights. So having a keen focus on what the law says, if you do it right, it can be a very powerful tool for conservation.
Right. Yeah. And then, talking about tourism, actually, CWS has done a lot of research on, wildlife tourism and how it can actually be a very, good tool for income generation for the local communities, but actually it's not happening in a lot of places. And, it's instead actually putting a lot of pressure, to meet the demands of, the rich people, and there are these luxurious resorts that have come up. So, it's really an important topic. But we'll come to these points a little bit later. But I want to come to the next question, which is, how do you see your roles as as a journalist or Mika as editor on wildlife conservation and creating awareness among the general public?
Okay, shall I go first, Rishika?
Yes. Yeah.
I think at least at Sustain, we see ourselves as a sort of bridge between the world of scientists and the world of the public at large. Because very often scientific papers are not necessarily the most accessible things. They're important, but they're not necessarily accessible or easy to understand. There is so much wonderful research that's happening in the world around us, which really needs to reach people and strike a chord. And that can only be done through powerful storytelling. And that's really what I see our role. Additionally, of course, as journalists and editors, it is our duty to be sort of the collective conscience keepers, of the world. It is our responsibility to highlight things that need urgent attention: dwindling species, threatened habitats, endangered ecosystems. But I also want to see this from a very personal sort of a lens, and I see how dramatically my worldview has changed since I started working for Sustain. Right. I know how differently I've started seeing the world. And I know that is true for a lot of people in my team as well, who were completely new to this world of wildlife and nature. And I've started seeing and observing the world around me very, very differently, right? Right from the pavements that I've walked on every day to the trees outside our houses. I've started seeing everything around me as a wild space, right? And all of that has really happened because Sustain has gifted me with this new way of observing the world around me. And I feel that is very, very powerful and very transformative. I now see the spiders in my bathroom very differently, and the sunbird on my terrace very differently. I actually notice the oriental white-eye that is flitting around when I'm walking to my car park, right? So for me, really, this is the gift that I want to give people, give our audience, through the work that we do at Sustain, this enhanced way of seeing the world, this completely different way of power of observation. So that's my answer to your question.
Thanks. Yeah, that's really interesting, and I can relate to that. Rishika?
Yeah. So I think as a journalist, awareness is one part of my role. For example, I do a lot of science journalism, so I cover new studies. That is purely science journalism, science communication, where awareness is my core aim. So when I cover a new study that talks about Western disturbances over India, for example, or I remember I did another report from Monga Bay. This was a few years ago, where some researchers, they identified how jackal horns, like horns in quotes because jackals don't really have horns, jackal horns were being traded on Amazon. Like these researchers, they came up with a whole report, and I covered this report for Monga Bay about how non-existent horns were being sold on platforms like Amazon also. And this was a purely awareness-driven study because people who are buying it should know that jackal horns don't exist. This is just something else wrapped in hair, wrapped in, I don't know, whatever else being sold as jackal horn. So awareness is one part of my aim when I write a story. But if I come to the hardcore journalism world, then I think holding people in power to account is my focus. So I have done many RTI-based stories. So one quite big investigative one was in the Karnataka State Board for Wildlife. So I got these RTI. So I was working with a local conservationist. He's actually from the rural area. He's from the Hills area. And he got these RTI documents, again, all in Kannada because this is Karnataka based. This is about how many people lobbied to get on the board, lobbied with the chief minister, they lobbied with the forest minister, they lobbied with the local MLA. And I have these letters as RTI. So they lobbied to get on the board. And once they came on the board, they took very compromised decisions. So, for example, there was one person who's on the Karnataka state board who is a pediatric doctor. So what is he doing on the board? But he actually lobbied to get on the board. There was another person, an MLA actually. He lobbied with the chief minister to get his son on the board, on the state board for wildlife. And then when a proposal came to declare the Hesarghatta area the conservation reserve, the MLA's son, who's actually the board member, was completely missing. The MLA came and sat in the meeting, and he rejected the proposal to declare the area as conservation reserve because the MLA is interested in the real estate interest of that area.
Wow.
So, and this is just one example. There are more investigative stories. One recently was on the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes, NCST, about how the chairman of the NCST had raised very grave concerns about the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill, which came up last year. It was passed as an act last year, an amendment to the act. But and so NCST is a constitutional body, and the chairperson of the NCST had written very strong letters to the environment minister, saying this will be in violation of tribal rights, and he had stated it very clearly. But then he was forced to resign a few months later. So through RTI, I got the letters that he wrote to the environment minister. So as a journalist, I think I see my role as having a focus on what people in power are doing. So awareness is one part. It's what I do also, because I want to keep a focus on the latest science. So I want to know what is happening. I want to cover studies, but awareness is more the fact. Core journalism role is still what I described right now, the kind of stories, investigative ones, which exposes what people in power are doing.
Right. I'd like to come to this a little bit later, like, how you find these stories, and especially talk about how, people lobby to get on the wildlife board. I'll come to that a little bit later. But, I just want to move on to the next question that, in your experience, how has the role of media in covering, conservation evolved over the years? And, what styles do you hope to see for the future? Because, I remember, I think maybe 10 years back, there were hardly any stories on wildlife and wildlife conservation in the media. And I think after Monga became and Ground Glass came, there has been a lot of interest in other media also has shown interest. But in your experience, if you could share some insights on this.
As someone who's been a newspaper editor for most of my life before in my pre-sustained avatar, I really understand the limitations and the pressures of mainstream media as well in covering issues like conservation. Because I feel like the problem really is that to cover issues like conservation, there is a whole deal of nuance that is needed when you're reporting or writing about them. But unfortunately, daily newspapers and television channels very often do not have the luxury or time to understand that nuance, right? So which is why you will read about, or you will see stories about an elephant that has trampled, 5 people, and it will be labeled as a rogue elephant. And but you will not necessarily see the bigger story, the entire story, which is, it won't talk about how, the fact that elephants remember roots through memory and human encroachment and the fragile relationship that people have shared with elephants historically in that area. None of that will really be spoken about. So, of course, there are exceptions to this, and of late, I've seen many more digital and print publications that are supporting good environmental storytelling. But I would like to see a lot more of that. I'd like to see a lot of publications give space to well-researched nature storytelling instead of just updates and reports. The other observation I have is that though increasingly climate change is beginning to make headlines, very often the conversation on biodiversity loss and its impact on climate change is often sidelined because there is this sense of how is that going to affect me. So I feel like that is something, I do believe that there is great value in to a lot of these non-tangible things, and we must try to find a way to mainstreamize this conversation as well. So, and one last point is that I'd love to see a lot more celebration of the local. Like I see very often that a lot of news is also focused on large national and international events, which are important, sure. But very often the change that is happening is also happening at very local and regional levels, sometimes even very hyper-local levels. So telling stories at multiple scales, whether big or small, really holds as much power to transform and to inform.
Yeah, I completely agree with the last point that you made about there needs to be a lot more local reporting and hyper-local and regional stories. So there is this issue with both international magazines and maybe sometimes with national magazines also asking what is the relevance for the larger audience. But it's all relevant, right? So, for example, if something is happening in Nandapa, for example, in Arunachal, it should be a concern for everyone. Either way, whether it is about wildlife, whether it is about rights of people living there, whatever it is a concern for all of us. But it should not be treated only as a local story for a local newspaper or a local mag. So this happens a lot, I'm guessing, with geographies like Northeast India or with geographies like maybe Lakshadweep Islands, or we don't hear stories from these kind of areas, or maybe Ladakh. They probably get stuck in those areas. Stuck meaning it's not their fault. It's all of our responsibility to bring out these stories and make more people aware of them. So local and hyper-local regional reporting, I definitely agree with that. I don't know how to comment on on where media has been before, because my journalism experience is just 6 years. So I didn't really follow much before that. So I don't know what wildlife coverage was like before that. But yeah, I'm guessing it has been an improvement over the last 2 years. That's how the general trend goes. But what I would like to see more of is a focus on wildlife governance. So, for example, covering what the State Board for Wildlife does across states. So, in many cases, they are just inactive. They've not met in maybe a year. They're supposed to hold at least 3 meetings, I think. Like, legally, they're supposed to hold 3. But either they're inactive or they're just clearing all projects that come their way. So, we don't have enough of a focus on what the State Boards for Wildlife are doing, or the National Board for Wildlife, for example. So, that has had the same members for many years now. Or maybe NGT. NGT, at least I do see reporting now and then when the National Park Tribunal takes up some cases. But I would like to see more focus on governance and these kind of institutions, or even Wildlife Institute of India. So I cover what wildlife cover, meaning I critically report on what Wildlife Institute is doing when it takes up a project where there is conflict of interest. For example, the same people are sitting and clearing the project, and the same people are conducting the studies for clearing the project. So I'm reported on stories like this. So I want to see a more focus on governance and these kind of institutions.
Yeah, very good points. I mean, just the mainstream media just focusing on, elephant killing or, leopard killing, but there's really not much to get, stories.
New species found is another favorite, usually.
Right. So for Megha, I'd like to ask you this. What are the challenges in building a media platform for wildlife conservation in terms of funding or access or even what has been your engagement like with the audience?
Well, we've been very fortunate as far as Sustain is concerned, because our platform has been funded for the last 5 years by our founder, Sunny Singh. And that has let us have a sort of purity of purpose. But we've always tried right from the beginning to sort of mitigate costs, as much as possible. But right now we are sort of at a cusp when we are looking to further our vision a little more and do more in-depth storytelling, and also moving towards that whole unknown world of trying to seek funding from outside. While we will sort of have Sunny's support as a cushion, we do want to build up a pipeline and reduce that sort of a full dependency on him. But as we are trying to enter that ecosystem, we also realize that it is going to be a hard nut to crack, because getting funded for nature communications or wildlife communications is going to be difficult, because there's so many people doing great work who are vying for the same limited resources, right? Limited because funding agencies always tend to prefer projects or fund projects that have a more tangible sort of on-ground impact. And with nature communications, very often that impact is not immediately tangible or quantifiable, right? However, I'm certain that there is reason to be hopeful because increasingly funding bodies are also beginning to realize that there is potential for content and storytelling to bring about the behavior change that I'm talking about. And I'm hoping that a lot more of that will happen because it is really the need of the hour. To answer your question about engagement, it has, when we started off to now, the response has been really overwhelming and heartening. We have great social media numbers, but I always feel that that is the most fickle thing, in the world, and I don't usually take that seriously. But what makes me really happy is when we're able to take our films and our content back to communities, when we're able to screen them in schools and colleges and gauge people's responses to it and have conversations with them later about, how they felt about it. I feel that is what really makes me happy. Any sort of validation is always nice. We won a couple of awards last year, so that also kind of helped us feel like we are headed in slightly okay direction, I guess. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Congratulations on those awards.
Thank you.
So Rishika, coming to you, what are your challenges on writing on topics like law and policy, which requires a lot of understanding and nuance. And, if you'd also touch a little bit on, how difficult or challenging it is to file RTIs, which is, you talk about that.
I'll start off with the RTI question because I think it's very important. I wish more journalists were doing it. I wish I was doing it more. It's definitely challenging. So RTI, getting internal documents, whether through RTI or even otherwise through sources is not easy. Building sources who will send something to you is one kind of challenge. RTI is another kind of challenge. RTI should ideally have been easier because they are legally required to actually share this data. But that's rarely the case. So, but RTI is a public interest tool because information belongs to all of us. So whatever government documents there are, it is supposed to be in the public domain. And actually, even RTI is supposed to be the last resort. RTI Act itself says that RTI should be a last resort and all of these should be hosted on the websites or it should be hosted publicly wherever by these same institutions. But unfortunately, we're in a state where we are required to file RTIs, and sometimes even when you file RTIs, it goes nowhere. You just get a response saying no information. You get a response saying this is compilation. It's not really seeking one document, so we reject it. I've filed RTI for the same thing multiple times sometimes, and sometimes it's just luck that works in your favor and you get it. I have half a cupboard space filled with RTI posts which are useless. My mother calls that my Raddi cupboard because that's where it will go. It has no use. But it is something that everyone should pursue, even if it's of no use, because this is a public right. We have a right to all of this information. And many of my stories, the investigative ones, are all based on RTI. And sometimes I've got documents otherwise also, but RTI is one big focus. Now coming to challenges about topics like law and policy, it's a niche. It is a niche, and it's easier if you have a beat focus. So I'm an environment reporter with a focus on wildlife, tribal rights, climate change. These three things are what I covered most of the time. And I do a little bit of other kind of environment reporting also. But broadly, it all still falls within the environment frame. And because I keep following the same thing again and again, the same laws, whether it's Wildlife Protection Act, Forest Rights Act, or whether it is even government policy, what the government is doing with the Environment Impact Assessment notification. So I deal with these laws and these policies every day. So I know that when something is changed, how was it before? How will that impact what is changed now? Whether it is a good change or a bad change, I can easily make out because I've been following it. And I know whether the amendment to the act is bad or not because I know what it was like before. Or even policy. For example, there are many policies. Whatever the government does is a policy decision. For example, even the mega project on Great Nicobar Island, now it is a policy decision that the government wants to take up this whole big project on that eco-sensitive area. That is a policy decision. And many of these policy decisions are challenged legally later on in court, like how this project is also challenged. Some aspects of the project are challenged. So yeah, it helps to have a beat. I know many are not lucky enough to have a beat. If you're working with a mainstream media, with the newspaper, for example, having a beat like wildlife and environment it doesn't come very easily. But if you have a beat focus, you'll be following the same thing day in and day out. So you'll know. So specialization comes easily because you're doing the same thing. I mean, you're following the same thing. And I also like the policy and law focus because it helps you narrow down exactly what the government is doing. So the broad critiques they're there, they're all right. But when the government is amending Forest Conservation Act in a particular way, you can specifically criticize it saying what is going on. So I like the specificity of law that law gives, and you can challenge them legally. Like I like that clarity that law brings. So that's why I followed, and I think
interesting. That requires, I think, a lot of focus to keep doing the same thing over and over again, and not divert your attention to other stuff. That's good advice. So this is now for both of you, since Megha, you head a media house, and Rishika, you've always been an independent journalist. So what are the pros and cons of working with a media house versus being an independent journalist?
Depends really. It entirely depends on where you're working. I have worked with publications my whole life. So for me, I would say I really enjoyed the process of it because I was also lucky to work with really wonderful places. But it also depends on where you're working. If the publication or the media house that you're working in is something that is supportive and nurturing and respects the kind of storytelling or the reporting or journalism that you want to do, then it's wonderful to work for a publishing house because you have access to resources, you have the stability. You also have you have teams where you can bounce off ideas. You can sometimes work on a story together. So I find that whole atmosphere really something. I feed off the energy of other people sometimes. So I really love that, and it's worked really well for me. But I do know that I have a lot of friends who are independent journalists, and I also know that they wouldn't choose this under any circumstances. And for them, their journey as independent journalists is something that they value very deeply because it also allows them to, like Rishika, follow the kind of stories single-mindedly that they would like to. And that is very, very important. And I guess they also get to work with different kinds of editors. That must also be an interesting experience. A lot of my friends also tell me that it might be, the journey might be lonely, but it has rewards in the end. So I guess there are pros and cons for both. I don't. Rishika will be able to answer that, the second part of it, a little better, I think.
I have been lucky to be able to enjoy independent journalism. I think a lot of it is luck because I see many people also struggling with independent. Money is a big issue. Okay, but before I want to start with the pros actually. So, what I was talking about earlier about a beat specific focus, I doubt I could have a wildlife beat or a climate change beat or a tribal rights beat if I was in a media house. If I was in a big media house, a corporate media house, for example. I would very likely be pushed into doing political stories, political reporting, or something else which I have no interest, like absolutely no interest in. So being an independent journalist helps me pick and choose topics that I want to report about, which I personally am bothered by. So all of my reports, so unless it's the science journalism where I just cover studies, all of my reports come because I'm frustrated with something. So I'll hear about something, I want to cover it because I think it's wrong. So I'm personally invested in all of the stories that I do, and all of them are what I have picked. So that really helps follow through. Because otherwise, if the story is difficult, for example, RTI is difficult, but I have find RTIs for 2-3 months sometimes, like repeatedly. So that follow through is difficult to come if it doesn't come personally from you. So, and freelance journalism allows me to do that. The other thing is working with editors, like I agree with Megha. So you get to experience different styles. So different editors have different styles. And I like working with that. So there's one science magazine I write for each. I think they've really helped me understand studies. So when they've helped me have a focus on the method. I have, and I mean it's both ways. I also try to dig into what the method is. I also try to read papers, I mean the studies, and they also ask me questions of, okay, what is this? What is this exactly? That has helped me. So different editors have different styles. If it's a science magazine, it's a different editor with a different style, with a different kind of focus. If it is editors at like maybe article 40, different kind of focus, where they want to focus on what is the position, what is the law application. So that helps me there. But yeah, I mean, these are the pros. Then the pros are what I would always highlight, because I wouldn't be doing this for 6 years if these pros were not overwhelmingly more than the cons. But the con is obviously money. It's not steady and stable. That is one issue. The other con, I think, sometimes I feel like my journalism has grown up in an orphanage, because it's just me trying to figure out what is this. I'm not studied journalism. So I feel like it's just I'm doing what I think is right, and I'm okay. Let's see where this goes. So, not necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, sometimes maybe something could have been clearer if there was a whole newsroom that could ideate about the story that you want to do, or tell you what all the different angles are, or even having a political reporter have a comment on what my report is. Maybe political reporters know the politicians in that area. I don't know. Maybe that kind of wholesome focus in a newsroom would have helped. But yeah, here it's my own orphanage, my own thing, and just, I mean, obviously there are editors there, but usually my own thing.
Yeah, but I've had when I was a journalist, I mean, I also was an independent journalist always, and so I really a lot of what Rishika said, and I've always thought, like, what would it be like if it was a media house? And yeah. Anyway, so going to the next question, which is something I'm interested in. Like, what articles or stories have you worked on, have you been involved in, that has had an impact on bringing change or awareness in policy, or awareness among the audience? Yeah, something. You couldn't hear me first? Go ahead. Yeah, I'll later.
Yeah. So awareness is there in every article, right? Every article you write, it will bring awareness. It will bring some amount of awareness to someone who didn't know this earlier. So I think awareness is a part of every article written by everyone, because it at least reaches one person, at least one. So this is the very low end. There's at least one person who didn't know one detail in what you have written. Usually there are thousands, maybe a lot more. So awareness is a given. When you're writing, I mean, at least I think if it's a specific beat focused one, or even otherwise, even generally, awareness is a given. But impact is, it's a much bigger deal. Some of my reports have been used in court, I know. So I remember one of my first reports that was used in court was about how these barges, like these big ships that carry fly ash from India to Bangladesh, they were all drowning, and this was in and around the Sundarbans area, again ecosystem area, and fly ash is toxic. It's a toxic chemical. Fly ash had heavy metals, so this was impacting the Sundarbans ecosystem area. And the thing is, India has laws which say fly ash should be 100% utilized. But the loophole is even export qualifies as utilization. So people were just sending them across to Bangladesh, where people were using them for buildings. In buildings mostly, they were using them like cement. So many were just exporting these, and the ships that were carrying them, they would just collapse somewhere midway, and many were collapsing around the Sundarbans area also. And I know that lawyers who had filed a case in the NGT for this, they used my report. I don't know ultimately what came of it. There were multiple hearings, but it was used as evidence. Very recently, one more impact was, I wrote about how the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes, the constitutional body which I mentioned earlier, NCST, So it has 5 key posts. There are many people in the NCST, but there are 5 key posts: chairperson, vice chairperson, and then 3 other members. All of them were vacant. There was one point, there was maybe a period of 25 days where all were vacant and chairman was vacant for 8 months. And this has not come out anywhere. I knew some sources who closely track NCST, and they told me that this is the state currently, and that was a very time-sensitive article. And I reported this, and I know from, again, these same insiders that a very high-level meeting was held the next day, where my report was on the table. And within a few days of that, the posts were filled. So it was also election pressure, because having no one at NCST. So NCST, it's not it's not an institution that is left and liberal. I mean, it's not that, because even the RSS. So RSS has a organization called Vanvasi Kalyan Ashram. So they work in these tribal areas. So NCST also has people from the RSS-backed Vanvasi Kalyan Ashram. So having a post like the NCST, which is the constitutional body which has interests across political spectrums, having 5 top key posts vacant is a big deal for everyone. And I reported this just before the election dates were announced. And it was filled within, I think, a week or 10 days. But the meeting was held just the next day morning or the day after. And my report was tabled in that meeting. So that was a very recent, very specific impact that I had. I'm sure, these are instances that I know of when my reports were used. I'm sure that there would have been other cases where I wouldn't have even heard of it. The impact is a little difficult to quantify in this way. You never know what impact your report has created. Usually, obviously it has an impact, right? Everything has an impact. But these were the few instances when I know specifically what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. It's good to know. Meena?
Yeah, so, like Krishika said, the objective of everybody's storytelling is always to have some sort of, awareness, inspire action, get impact. That's always the case. But the way we think about it is slightly different, because, the action that we really hope to inspire could really be anything, right? For me, it could be inspiring individuals to be more respectful and more observant to the surroundings around them, getting people to care, essentially, right? Or it could be something much larger, like using our content for advocacy or for policy change. Impact could also mean our films, our infographics, for example, being used in schools and colleges without us even knowing about it, which I know happens for a fact. So the point I'm trying to make is exactly what Deepa was also saying, Rishika was also saying, which is that impact is not always tangible or measurable, right? But having said that, of course, some of our films, one of our films on the Orans of Rajasthan was used by Sumer, who's a local conservationist, to try and halt some of the work on the power lines there. And I think he was successful in at least temporarily, halting the work of 2 of the power lines. Similarly, our film on Galatia was used to sort of urge reconsideration of, the port of Great Nicobar, which is, still ongoing. But very often storytelling can also add momentum to an ongoing issue, right? Which happened in the case of, let's say, the Molem movement or the RA, and the coastal route protests, the dam at Dibang, the Ken-Betwa linking project. Our job, I feel very strongly, is to amplify voices as much as possible in the capacity that we have. So, yeah.
Sounds really interesting. So coming to my next question, Rishika, you write more about science, science articles, and Meena, you also write a lot about the work of researchers who are working in conservation. So, would you have any suggestions or tips, on how scientists can communicate their work better, and what kind of questions journalists can also ask? Because I know sometimes they feel that science or is a bit daunting, and we don't know how to kind of approach researchers or what kind of questions to ask.
I had a very nice experience very recently with the science. So I was writing this was another science Science magazine. It was years where I wrote about Western disturbances. So Western disturbances are a phenomena that was somewhere in the back of my mind. I used to keep hearing about it, but I never really delved into what exactly Western disturbances are. So this was my first full-fledged report about, full-fledged meaning my first understanding of what Western disturbances are, because it was required if I was covering a study on Western disturbances. So there was a paper that was showing the linkages between, not linkages, but it was showing what is happening to Western disturbances, why the patterns are changing, and there was a climate link also. Climate is one factor, there were others. But I had to first understand what Western disturbances are. So I remember I had a video call with the author of the study, and he explained that he did simplify a lot of it. But when I was going through the recording, I was still confused. I still didn't know what exactly he was saying, because it's very difficult to imagine atmospheric space, right? If they say these winds are blowing in this subtropical, I don't know. I don't even know who was that we used. I mean, how do you imagine atmospheric space where the winds are originating, where they're going? So in their mind, they know where the Tibetan plateau is. In their mind, they know where North India. I mean, I know where North India is, but they have the whole image in their mind. But I don't. I can't imagine Tibetan plateau and winds coming from somewhere in the Middle East, or I don't know, some Pacific area. I can't imagine the movement. So I was still very confused, and I asked him for another video call, and I told him, please, can you use a pencil and a map? And he did that. So in the next video call, he actually used colored sketch pens. So he used his daughter's colored sketch pens, and he used a map, and he actually drew the Western disturbance, and like he drew different phenomena in different colors. And I actually recorded what he was saying, and then I delved into, okay, what does this study? So now that I know what Western disturbances are, what changes are happening, so then I got into it. But here the onus is on both. It's on scientists to simplify, but also on the journalists to actually ask enough questions that you actually understand what the study is about, that you actually understand what you're reporting about. I don't know how many journalists actually fully read the paper they are covering. I mean, it's a pity, because you can't just read the abstract and the conclusion, or even just the abstract and think you can do a report which will be meaningful. It can't be. It won't be. And also the method. So yeah, the method is one thing that I would rely on the scientists for, because usually method is the abstract and conclusion are usually in general terms, at least from what I've read. Maybe some parts of the introduction also, but usually method is very specific. It is very technical. And I have to always go back to the scientists to understand what method they have used and what the limitations are. And they would have mentioned the limitations very clearly. But for these two things, I think it would help if the scientists start off with the methods and the limitations. So you can really assess what the study is. So method can reveal a lot about limitations. Method can, so I would say that it would help if instead of just sending a PR, like a press release about the major conclusions, they could also include a paragraph about method and limitation. That would be very useful, I think. But I think even if that's not there, the onus is still on the journalist to not just cover the PR form and the abstract. It's on you to actually try to understand what the study is saying. Yep.
Yeah, so, for us, we have a lot of scientists who actually also write for us. So, and I've had many conversations with scientists and researchers about writing for a world that is not familiar with science. So I've always believed that even though there's so much wonderful work happening, in the work happening in the world of science and research, very often it doesn't necessarily reach the public. A large part, I think a part of the reason is that very often scientists get a little attached to their research, and which is a great thing. And I say this with great love, which is a wonderful thing as a scientist, but it doesn't always work when you are writing for an audience that is not in the world, from the world of science, right? So very often what happens is scientific terminologies or jargon is so everyday for scientists that they don't necessarily see it as alienating for somebody else. But for someone who's from from a completely different ecosystem, it just makes that whole world seem very intimidating and not inclusive, especially when you are writing, right? So for scientists who are looking to write for a mainstream publication, the advice I would definitely give is, try and find a little bit of distance from your research, and try and instead look for a narrative or an interesting book that you think will make people excite people, right? I always say, tell me about your research like I'm a 12-year-old, right? Because I want to know more about your research process. I want to know if it was an adventure. I want to know what the journey was like for you. Did you have lessons there that went beyond your research? Very often, storytelling is not just about giving information, but making me invested in your story as a reader, right? So at the cost of repeating myself, I cannot emphasize enough on how important it is to sort of demystify the jargon. To just give you a brief example, we worked on this really wonderful research paper on which studied jungle babblers, and because jungle babblers are all around us, and we created this video that went out of it eventually. And the research paper was titled "Structural and Functional Complexity of Vocalizations in a Cooperatively Breeding Passerine Jungle Babbler." Now, for somebody like me who failed science in school, this sounds very, very, alienating. But the science in this paper was absolutely fascinating, because what it actually talks about is how jungle babblers have evolved this really complex system of communication, and how there is meaning to their calls. So essentially, then we call the babblers, we call the video, not the babblers, what the jungle babblers babble about, right? So what I'm trying to say is that it may seem like two very disparate worlds, but it is possible to bridge that gap, and we all, both the scientists and communicators, must try and do that to the best of our ability to make sure that it reaches as many people as possible.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, I have seen many studies which have these titles that sound really intimidating, and I kind of don't look at it, but then later on I realized, oh, this was a really interesting study. So I can
that's a point. Paper, because that is what is required of it at that time, right? So
yeah. This is kind of the other side of the question, which was like, how can communicators and journalists, we have a lot of fake news these days. How can they navigate fake news and also avoid misreporting, scientific facts? And an add-on, Megha, for you is, in terms of pitches, like what kind of, pitches do you look for when journalists pitch, and is there anything that stands out to you, and what would you like to see more of?
Well, okay, that's many questions. Okay. Well, I mean, we are living in a world of, where fake news is being mass manufactured every day, and which is scary enough. And now, as though that was not enough, we have AI generating fake photos and videos as well. So, I mean, it's really very challenging, to be a journalist at this time and navigate this rapidly changing world that we don't necessarily fully understand, and still do that without putting a foot wrong anywhere, right? But simultaneously, in a sort of what I see as a ray of hope, there are also digital platforms and websites that are doing a lot of fact checking. But most importantly, and I know we're running out of time, so I'll be very brief, but I feel like we should rely on our common sense and the instincts that we've built over these years, and also try and read between the lines and ask questions like, why is this piece of information being given out right now? Who will it benefit? Is there another way of looking at it? These are all questions that we should ask as reporters. Now, in terms of how do you pitch, and what is a good pitch? Editors get multiple pitches every day, and a very, very simple thing is editors pick pitches that catch their eye. It's as simple as that. So sometimes it really helps to have a nice, interesting subject line that tells you about your story. Plus, don't make your pitches long. 300 words is more than enough. Please do not send entire stories, because it becomes really hard for editors to go through an entire story before deciding whether they want to use it or not. And the pitch really needs to sum up the entire idea of the story and the direction that you're going to be taking with the story. That's also really important. It must be, it needs to be intriguing. It needs to be timely. Must have a context around why you're pitching a particular story at this time. It must also be supported by evidence. Again, as an editor, I also want to know what qualifies you to be telling that story? Why should you be telling that story? So that is also something that I would like to know. But most importantly, I feel like a pitch needs a unique hook. It needs a unique angle, an angle ideally that should be surprising. It should be unexplored. It should be something that is counterintuitive. And you will realize that giving a good angle to a story very often completely changes and transforms the story that you want to tell. I want to just give a very quick example of this story that I absolutely loved. It was from this publication called 538, and it was the story of a single panda called Pan Pan that produced so many offspring that the entire zoos and research centers were filled with his offspring. But the point was that till Pan Pan began this proliferation of his offspring everywhere, they thought that they would have to use artificial insemination to be able to conserve the panda in China. And today there are over 500 pandas living in captivity, and a quarter of them are Pan Pan's children, right? That was the whole point of the story. Now, the story used this as a hook, right? But the story that it was trying to tell was about the plight of pandas and the challenges of conserving the pandas. And the headline that the publication chose to give was the complicated legacy of a panda who was really good at sex, right? Now, that is a story that anybody would pick up and read. So I just thought that was an interesting idea, interesting way of explaining books and pegs to stories.
Okay, Rishika, very briefly.
Yeah, I second what she said about specialization. So if you have a you build in, that's how you build instincts, right? Like if you keep reporting on the theme of wildlife or climate change, it's easy to separate facts from what is generally thrown as a fact. So one recent thing, one thing that constantly annoys me, and recently also I was talking about it, I was tweeting about it, was so people think coal is a problem because coal has very high emissions intensity. So compared to oil and gas, if you have to produce the same amount of energy, you need to burn a lot more coal and therefore emit a lot more CO2 as opposed to oil and gas. That is true. But then if you are a country like the United States and you're burning a massive amount of oil and gas, then this emissions and intensity is not a factor anymore. So, for example, India's emissions from coal, India's CO2 emissions from coal are much less than the US emissions from oil and gas. So, I mean, this is a very basic scientific fact. But I know many people tend to focus on coal because coal is viewed as dirty, right? I mean, we have sseen coal mining. It is dirty, not just viewed as dirty. It is definitely dirty. So, if you leave CO2 out of the equation, there are a lot of other air pollutants that are associated with coal mining, that are associated with burning coal, all of it. So we have this image in our mind and we forget specifically what CO2 is, what it does, and that is the factor that is driving climate change. So when you start covering a beat, it's good to first brush up on the science of it. Before you start covering coal, just try to see what coal comprises of. What are all the things that coal has that is contributing to climate change? And you'll see that it's CO2 and it's also SO2, and SO2 is a cooling agent. I mean, I don't want to get into that now, but then it would help to actually get all the science of the basic science. This is not complicated science. This is very basic science. The grades of coal, which coal has more, which coal can lead to more pollution, coal compared to oil and gas. This is very basic. If you're a climate change reporter, you should know this. Another issue recently was about heat waves. Whenever we have heat waves, there's this whole bandwagon effect that comes up where everyone starts sharing red-colored maps. The whole South Asia in red. But what causes heat waves are anomalies. But these maps that they don't show temperature anomalies, they show overall temperature. So even 35 degrees, 40 degrees, 45 degrees, there's no distinction. So because 40 degrees for summer, 35 degrees for summer is common in some areas, especially in South Asia. But these maps paint all of them in red, different colors of different shades of red, but it's all in red. So people can't really make out if it's an anomaly because of climate change or if it is just regular summer heat. So, it's good to follow scientists who can tell you these things. It's good for you also to learn basic science facts so that you don't misreport, so that you don't create alarm. And that's how I have learned it. But again, this is beat. Because I'm a beat reporter, I have the luxury of following things to this extent.
And also scientific fact-checking, which is something that needs to be taken very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it really helps, I think, journalists or communicators to use their discretion and look at any information, not just take it at face value and try to investigate a little bit before they decide to report on it. So great advice. Thank you so much. We're out of time, but I think we can take a few questions. Let me just look at. There is one question by Nishan. Am I pronouncing it correctly? How much does personal observation and stories related to nature and wildlife influence people to look for more information about wildlife or environment-related issues, or even work for nature conservation activities? Kindly share your insights. Also share your thoughts about sensationalism and some of the media reports related to wildlife that can indirectly harm wildlife or create unnecessary tensions.
Sorry, go ahead, Rishika.
Okay. So about sensationalism, I would say that the reporting about conflict, wildlife and human conflict, that has always been a problem. It was a problem 6 years ago when I started reporting it. It was a problem throughout. It was a problem today also. So usually the animal is painted as problematic. It doesn't help. It doesn't help if you just focus on that one incident and paint either actor as a bad actor, because there are a lot of forces. Maybe there would have been diversion for some project. Maybe it's fragmentation that is, in many cases, it is fragmentation that is leading to conflict. So the whole broader picture, the core reason for the conflict gets lost, and a lot of sensational reporting happens. That is one area where I think media, and this is mostly mainstream media, can do a much better job and actually help conservation, help the people also. Because if you just keep, that tension is already simmering on the ground. Because imagine if you have lost your son, if you've lost a kid to conflict, and then you keep seeing media reports that show the elephant or the tiger or whatever as the bad actor, how will it help reduce that tension that is already simmering on the ground? So if you have the focus on governance, like wildlife governance, then you can have a better angle to your story. So yeah, that's what I want to say about sensationalization.
Absolutely agree with Rishika. And since she's answered the second part of the question, I will try and answer the first part, which is that I am a very strong believer in the fact that all kinds of personal observations, I think everything helps push forward this movement for being more mindful and observant, and thereby bringing about behavior change in the future. It might not feel like that right now. It might not feel tangible at all. But I really believe that, something as innocuous and simple as you putting up a Facebook post about, a bird that you saw from the balcony or from your terrace might just prompt me as your neighbor to just look around a little more carefully. And then I might eventually become more interested in birding, become a part of larger groups. And that's how the whole arc of transformation really happens. It is that one moment, that one thing that triggers you, that makes you feel a little differently about the world around you. So yes, I definitely believe that independent storytelling, observations, personal narratives, they're all very, very important to the larger scheme of things. It might feel like very small and insignificant, but I feel like it's really not.
Ishan has one more question, but before that, I think Yuan has raised his hand. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question, or?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask about the role of journalists and journalism in the management of wildlife and human conflict, especially back in India, where there are problems with tigers, with some elephant species, and maybe what type of insights do you have for us here in Colombia to manage those type of negative interactions throughout the scope of journalism? Thank you.
Rishika, you want to take that?
Yeah. So what I was talking about wildland governance and fragmentation, I think that's where that's where the solution should come from, because the burden shouldn't again fall on the communities to resolve that issue. Like, it shouldn't again be left to the local actors to deal with it. However, I mean, that doesn't help. So governance, like, who are the people who are failing to keep the people and the animals safe? So so fragmentation is one big issue that always leads to conflict. Fragmentation is an issue, I think, in most of the cases. There would be some diversion for some project, or there will be tea estates, coffee estates that have suddenly come up, and this has come up in the elephant migration path. Or there will be an oil and gas project that has come up in an elephant migration path, or an elephant habitat, or whatever other wild habitat. So fragmentation would be the cause. And fragmentation, the good thing about fragmentation, the good thing about focusing on fragmentation, about focusing on wildlife governance is you don't blame either the animal or the people.
Exactly.
If people have killed an elephant because it has killed their son, you can't blame either party. That is not where the focus of the journalism report should be, because neither of them are at fault. It's the governance failure that has led to a situation where people and animals are in that conflict situation. So again, if you focus on people in power who should be giving solutions for this, then that would help. And that's where media focus should be, I think. But then usually what we see is media images with the problematic elephant or the problematic tiger. And that doesn't help. It doesn't help anyone. Or you paint the community as bad because they have killed the tiger or the elephant. That is again wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, I think exactly what we've already discussed before this, which is that completely agree with what Rishika is saying about holding governance responsible for it, and how that, removes the whole blame game from the people or the animals. But also, as journalists, be more mindful when you're reporting about conflict, when you're reporting about, fragile landscapes. Don't paint either people or animals as rogues. Don't sensationalize, and try and look at the larger picture, I guess.
Thank you. One last question I think we can take. There's a question on your thoughts on actions by some of the influencers, especially on social media, who, without understanding the behaviors of species or their habitats, writing or sharing information or videos for the sake of likes or comments, which can cause disruption for animals or even locations where these flora and fauna prevail undisturbed for a long time.
Yeah, I think that is a deeply disturbing and scary trend. And also, the fact that there is no respect. I see people taking selfies with, trying to get off jeeps in safaris and taking selfies. And right now, I feel like there is no regulation in terms of and control over what's really happening on social media. So extremely scary, dangerous trend needs to be. I really don't have answers in terms of how something like this can be quelled, because social media in my head is, the way I see it, is also becoming more and more powerful and more of a monster every day. So I really don't have an answer to how that can be quelled, but it is a very, very deeply disturbing trend and something that worries me immensely when I see. Rishika?
I agree with that. So it's a huge proliferation, like whether on Instagram, the reels, or even generally the kind of videos that you see. Many influencers are going and taking cute pictures of animals or cute animal behavior. It's a trendy, and it's obviously a gimmick. But like, I was thinking of the cirrus crane and the farmer. I think his name was.
Yeah.
I mean that was a beautiful relationship.
Yeah,
I have nothing against that.
Yeah,
there are always things that you can be for and against. It's not all of it is bad, because the cirrus crane and the farmer, that was a very beautiful story, and I don't know why that was criminalized. I still don't understand why that had to go the way it did. So some relationships, I'm not the kind of person who thinks wild and people should be kept separate. There should be no interaction. I don't fully agree with that. But obviously there are limits. You can't domesticate everything. I don't know how to navigate that space yet, but the cirrus crane and the farmer, that was the beautiful story.
Yeah, just to take off and make a brief point from what Rishika was talking about, also in terms of not just influencers, but also photographers to have some sort of guidelines and ethics about what you will do and what you will not do for the sake of a photograph, I think is very, very, and that is again something that we're very careful about who we work with at Sustain, and make sure that we have guidelines about the kind of work that we will support and patronize. So I think that is also really important that organizations do that.
Right, yeah. So I'm part of a WhatsApp wildlife first group, and one of the policies there is that we don't share photographs of nests of birds or any such kind of sensitive photos. So yeah, I think we've really run out of time. It's gone overboard, but thank you so much, everybody who has joined, and thank you, Rishika and Mila, for your time. It's been really, really insightful and informative, even for me. And I just wanted to know if, this from CWS, if you wish to support our work. CWS does a lot of work on human-wildlife conflicts. We have a lot of community programs that work with communities living around wildlife that supports them to, live with animals and support villagers that have undergone conflict. So if you'd like to support our work, this is a QR code to donate. And if you have joined it, this recording will be made available on YouTube, and you should be able to watch it there. So, sorry we've run out of time and can't take any more questions. But thank you so much for joining again. This was really great.
Thank you all. Thank you, Deepa. Thank you, Rishika. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So CWS started these, the webinar series from until 2020, CWS used to host public talks on latest topics in wildlife science and conservation in the Bangalore office. But due to the pandemic in 2020, we started having these as a series of webinars online. And so far, our webinars have covered a wide range of interesting topics, such as public health and zoonotic diseases, tigers, elephants, snake bites, bioacoustics. And if any of you are interested in, listening to our past webinars, they are available on our YouTube channel. All our webinars are recorded, and even this is being recorded and will be available on YouTube.